So Hanukkah is one of my favorite holidays. When I was in high school, my favorite holiday was Sukkot because we were off at MTA from Yom Kippur through Sukkot. It was like a 3-week vacation. But Hanukkah resonates because of the symbolism, because of the soul of Hanukkah, because of the light of Hanukkah. And for some people, it's the presents. For some, it's the latkes, and some it's the donuts. Next Thursday evening, I'll be giving a class on latkes versus donuts for those who want to, sample both and decide which one wins. But Hanukkah, really at its core is about, as the word implies, dedication. It was a dedication to, a rededication to the Jewish life. And there was a struggle between Jews and Greeks, and there was a struggle between Jews and Hellenizing Jews, and it represents the magnificent, messy existence, the complicated existence of the Jew. Chanukah, also the word chinuch there is education. Hanukkah is the holiday of the rabbis, right? Because Hanukkah does not appear anywhere in the Tanakh, and there's no biblical book. Esther took place after the destruction of the first temple, but there's a book of Esther in the writings, in the Ketuvim. But Hanukkah is rabbinic in nature, so it represents that continuation down the chain of Judaism from a biblical prophetic religion to a legislated religion. And so there's really a lot to grab onto. And because of that, one of the major themes has to do with sharing the light of Hanukkah. We know how very often people are accustomed to try to bring their families together for Hanukkah. There are Hanukkah parties for set communities, and there are also public lightings of the menorah, which have been made popular by Chabad, although I would say it's not exclusively a Chabad phenomenon anymore. They were the initiators of this idea, and we'll look at source number one in a minute. A little bit of a report of that first one, but there's something illuminating, there's something attractive, there's something inspiring by sharing the light of Hanukkah. So the source link is in the chat, and we're going to look at source number one, an article from Chabad.org that tells the history of the Chabad lightings. It was a frigid Saturday night during Hanukkah of 1974 when Rabbi Abraham Shem Tov had the unusual, perhaps wild idea of lighting a menorah right in front of Independence Hall, which houses the Liberty Bell, the icon of American freedom. The menorah was crude and made of wood. He had fashioned it with the help of some visiting yeshiva students. Almost no one was on Independence Mall in Philadelphia that night to witness the actual lighting. They also didn't have a permit. But that simple 4-foot menorah was the seed from which thousands of public menorahs have sprouted up on public and private places throughout the United States and around the world. So it's almost 50 years old as a phenomenon doing in public places. And you can look at the Chabad the article in its entirety. There have been ups and downs and lawsuits, and the ACLU was against it. It was separation of church and state. Menorah is a religious symbol. And, as we would say, yada, 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 the discussion or the issue continues to unfold. But for the most part, the idea of incorporating a public display of Hanukkah this time of year, especially with the December dilemma of another major celebration, it's a demonstration of Jewish pride, of Jewish connection, of Jewish commitment. And Hanukkah very much lends itself to this type of an opportunity. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about how Thanksgiving is a great holiday and the fact that it brings together family and food and gratitude and all sorts of elements that have meaning, but takes place during the week. Right? So you're not bound necessarily by the religious restrictions of a Shabbat or festival. Hanukkah, at least 6 of the days, usually 7 of the days, are not Shabbos. So you also have this opportunity to try different things and make it, you can use amplification, you can use video, you can use all types of attractions to make the Hanukkah public experience all the more engaging. But I wanted to look at some of the sources with regards to the this idea of these Hanukkah lightings. Are they real mitzvah lightings of the Hanukkah lights? Right. Sometimes when I speak, I try not to use the word menorah, because when we light on Hanukkah, what we light on Hanukkah is not a menorah, right? As people may be aware, I see Phyllis is aware, right? The idea of what we light on Hanukkah is a Chanukah. What they lit in the Beit HaMikdash, what they lit in the temple was a menorah that had 7 branches. And then what we light on Hanukkah has to have 8 branches. Usually it has a 9th for the shamash candle as well, but that's not a menorah. So, you are excused for calling it a menorah, because most of the time we do, but sometimes we have the Hanukkah lightings instead of the menorah lightings. But in any event, what is the Hanukkah lighting? How is that mitzvah fulfilled? What is the best way to do something like this? And also, is as a symbol, it may have a lot of resonance and a lot of attraction, right? You'll have the participation of the light. They light a menorah in the White House grounds. You have members of the administration involved. The president has a Hanukkah party. You have all the engagement. But what about that lighting of the menorah outside in public? Is that actually a mitzvah? Right? When we light the Hanukkah lights, we say a bracha. The bracha is Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'hadlik ner shel Hanukkah. We say a blessing that we're commanded to light the Hanukkah lights. It's actually, the Talmud has a very fundamental question about this, because it says that we are commanded to light the Hanukkah lights. Talmud asks in Hechan Sivanu, where were we commanded by God to light Hanukkah lights? We said before that Hanukkah is not in the Torah. It's not in the Bible. So where is the commandment? So the Talmud answers, one of my favorite verses in the Torah: whatever the rabbis tell you to do, you shall not deviate left or right. The rabbis have been the rabbis have been empowered to create celebrations, and they have they also have the divine imprimatur on them. Okay, so that is the mitzvah of lighting the Hanukkah lights. But where is the mitzvah? How is it supposed to be done? And I know we're all very familiar with how we do it, but what are the Talmudic sources? And so let's kind of, as they say, let's go to the videotape, or let's go to the Talmud itself and unpack where and when and how we're supposed to light. And hopefully that will also shed light on these public menorah lightings, which, by the way, isn't only about these outdoor giant menorah lightings, but if you've ever been at a Hanukkah party, right? People may have lit Hanukkah candles themselves at home, and they go to a Hanukkah party and someone leaves a lighting. Is that necessary? Is that a mitzvah also? And I'd like to try and frame the idea that we will be able to blaze a path to the idea that the more light on Hanukkah, the better, and it is sanctified, even if it isn't necessary for our own home personal lightings. So with that introduction, before we go into the Talmud and the codes, questions, comments, or reactions?
Rabbi?
Yes.
How does, in your mind, Hanukkah rank of all the different holidays that we have?
Well, look, they're all special, right? They're all holy. In particular, I think Hanukkah, and I think this will emerge from some of the sources that we start studying. For a long time, Hanukkah was the last of the holidays. Hanukkah is a holiday that we say the Hallel, the Thanksgiving prayer for all 8 days, and we say a blessing on that Thanksgiving prayer all 8 days. In a sense, it models for us what type of event warrants this type of celebration, because Hanukkah wasn't only the miracle of the oil; it was the miracle. It was the victory of the military victory of the Hasmoneans and Judah Maccabee. So in some ways, Hanukkah models for us even the idea of Yom Ha'atzmaut, the idea of Israel Independence Day being commemorated and celebrated as a holiday. And maybe we can unpack some of the similarities maybe this year for Yom Ha'atzmaut, but we have a period in Jewish history. Most of our holidays are biblical. The Torah tells us how to celebrate. Torah tells us what to do. There's a kind of divine imprimatur on it. Here, Chanukah, all you have the reverberations of that divine imprimatur, but you don't have a prophet telling us to celebrate Hanukkah, right? You don't have a biblical character. And in traditional Judaism, it's that biblical imprimatur which gives it such significance or momentum. Hanukkah, for all of its current popularity, and Hanukkah wasn't always viewed necessarily as so celebratory. The idea of Jewish victory, the idea of Jewish independence, when Jews, especially in the 19th century, were trying to be more like everyone else, Hanukkah is very particularistic. We fast forward to now, a lot of the themes of Hanukkah, very often public officials at Hanukkah time talk about the messages of religious freedom that are contained within Hanukkah. So there's some truth to that, but there also was a little bit of a battle taking place. It wasn't only about religious freedom; it was about religious commitment, and the battle between those more traditional Jews and those less traditional Jews, which was a battle that takes place historically from the time of Hanukkah until the destruction of the Second Temple. So it's all the holidays are great. I don't want anyone to get insulted if they like other holidays better, but Hanukkah does retain a very unique place historically and religiously through which to understand and deepen our connection to the other holidays or the current Jewish condition, contemporary Jewish condition that isn't shaped anymore by divine messages or prophets.
Rabbi, nevertheless, Pesach is more widely celebrated, in my opinion. I don't know.
So we could probably go to the various researches and studies that have been done in the Jewish community in terms of which ones are the most celebrated. Hanukkah's up there. Passover Seder is there. Although maybe the difference is that the Passover Seders that are celebrated by Jews who claim to celebrate a Passover Seder aren't necessarily halachic, aren't necessarily authentic expressions of what a Passover Seder is meant to be. And I remember walking on Madison Avenue on Passover, and there's a non-kosher restaurant that has a sign in the window, have your Passover Seder here, and they have boxes of matzah on the table. So you're having non-kosher food, and you may also be eating bread, but since it's a box of matzah, that makes it a Seder. So it's a little bit harder to express genuine observance if it's not being done in authentic fashion. Something like Hanukkah is a little bit easier because all it takes is the lighting of the lights, which is, has a certain simplistic authenticity, which makes it, those who are observing, those who are lighting Hanukkah lights are definitely doing it the right way, as we'll see in a minute, because you look at, it's a perfect segue into source number 2. The Talmud in Masechet Shabbat is where we encounter a lot of the traditions about Hanukkah. Which makes sense because the Talmud in Masechet Shabbat in the 2nd chapter is addressing all of the various laws and details of Shabbos lights. So when discussing Shabbos lights, it also deals with Hanukkah lights. Now, just one other note about the way Hanukkah is taught in the Talmud. Hanukkah does not have its own tractate. Hanukkah actually appears, I think, only once or twice in the entire Mishnah. Right? And for those who, quick review, the Mishnah are the detailed laws that were edited by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi around the year 200. And then the discussions about those teachings, those laws, are called the Gemara. And those were conversations the rabbis had for the next 300 years until around the year 500. So in Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi's Mishnah, the entire Mishnah, there's a reference, I know one, maybe there's a second one, but there's a reference to Hanukkah. And it's not even about the holiday. The reference is found in the tractate Bava Kama, which deals with damages and describes a situation where a person is leading his camel through the marketplace and it knocks over a lamp. So the person is, it depends, if the lamp was too far out into the pathway, then the owner of the lamp is responsible. If the lamp was right in the right place, then the owner of the camel is responsible. But if the lamp was a Hanukkah light, it was allowed to be a little bit more further out into the road. Why? Because as we're going to see, that's where you're supposed to light them. So it's not even talking about celebrating Hanukkah. It's talking about what happens if a Hanukkah lamp gets knocked over. It's a very perplexing dilemma, a question, why Chanukah appears nowhere else in the Mishnah, and I don't know if any of the answers are fully satisfactory. But here the Talmud, the Gemara talks about it. The sages taught. So the basic mitzvah of Chanukah is each day to have a light kindled for himself and his household. So Chanukah, each of the 8 days of Chanukah, if you light one candle, you have fulfilled the mitzvah. So that's why, Al, going back to before in terms of observance, if all you do is light up a light on Hanukkah, you fulfill the obligation, you fulfill the mitzvah, even if it's the 6th night of Hanukkah. If you light one light on the 7th night of Hanukkah, you fulfill the basic obligation because it's about having a light, any light, one light. So then the Talmud goes into discussion, but there are the Mahadrin, those who would like to be more meticulous. They kindle a light for each and every one in the household. So that means if there are 7 members of a household and it's the 7th night of Hanukkah, they will have how many? 7 candles, 1 candle for each person. It doesn't change. Now you're thinking that's not how we do it. Well, that's the third opinion quoted in the Talmud. Mahadrin min ha-mahadrin, those who are yet even more meticulous, they adjust the number of lights daily. Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagree as to the nature of that adjustment. Beit Shammai say on the first day one kindles 8 lights, and from then on gradually decreases the number of lights until on the last day of Hanukkah he kindles 1 light. And Beit Hillel say on the first day one kindles 1 light, and from there one gradually increases the number of lights until the last day he kindles 8 lights. If that sounds familiar, that's ultimately the Beit Hillel approach is adopted, and we have an ascending number of candles. So that's the Hanukkah we're used to, and note that's 2 steps beyond the basic obligation. The basic obligation requires 1 light each night. 5 people, 5th night, 1 light. A more meticulous performance is 1 candle for each person on each night. 5 people, 5th night, 5 lights. And the highest level is to have an ascending level of candles. It's a larger discussion whether this opinion of Beit Hillel means every single person lights their own Hanukkah lights, or whether it's only 1 for the household lighting an ascending number. Different practices, different customs. Suffice it to say that the standard Ashkenaz approach encourages each member of the household to have their own Chanukiah, which would mean on the 5th night of Hanukkah, and there are 5 people, you'll have 25 candles being lit. So that is the order of the lighting. That is the mitzvah. 1 light, the more light there is, the better it's viewed. But essentially, if all you have is 1 little flickering candle each night, you've fulfilled the obligation. Questions, comments, or reactions to the way it's introduced?
Rabbi?
Yes.
The Pesach is discussed in the Mishnah?
Yes. In general, it's like I mentioned that Hanukkah doesn't have a Mishnah, doesn't have a tractate, a volume dedicated to it. Pesach has a volume, Sukkot has a volume, Rosh Hashanah has a volume, Yom Kippur has a volume. The Shavuos doesn't really have a volume, but it has a tangential volume, Bikurim, that addresses it. Purim has a volume, Megillah. Hanukkah does not have its own volume. There have been one approach is that Hanukkah, as we mentioned earlier, represents the transition, or the pivot from the prophetic influence to the rabbinic influence. And the rabbinic influence at the time was an oral tradition. Hanukkah was meant to be discussed. Hanukkah is about education, and to put it all together into a nice little box isn't really the goal of the education. Now, that doesn't really work, because what about all the other holidays? So a historical suggestion was offered that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was a descendant of the Davidic line. There had always been a leader from the house of David who had been an authority figure over the Jewish people. Even during the Second Temple period, and even when the Second Temple was destroyed, there always had been a Nasi, translates as president, a leader of the Jewish people. And it was a respected office, so much so that the Romans, when they destroyed the temple, they left that office intact. Now, there was a bit of a disagreement between the Hasmoneans and the House of David, because the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, were Kohanim, were priests. And when they led the Jews to victory, they inserted themselves as king. You had the Hasmonean dynasty. They were kings, but they were also priests. The priests are supposed to be from the House of David. So there was a little bit of a tension between the Hasmoneans and the House of the Nasi, because the House of the Nasi, the House of David, should really be responsible, be in charge. And instead, you have a certain Hasmonean usurping of the monarchy. Maimonides discusses this, Nachmanides discusses this, but some have felt that because of that disagreement, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi did not include a tractate about Chanukah. It's a little bit, it sounds more like a political grudge, but that idea is discussed because it is glaringly, it is a glaring omission that Chanukah does not have its laws all in one place. And it's not in the Mishnah, and it doesn't seem to have, considering it's an 8-day holiday with lighting of candles and a hallel that's recited, it definitely rates from the number of rituals that are connected to it, but it doesn't have it.
Rabbi Weinstock, I'm
yeah.
so sorry. I just wanted to ask, the Hashmonaim, what was the very, the serious, the sinister part of them? Is that they had made themselves kings and weren't as God-fearing? I mean, because it was looked down upon how they became,
So again, depends, look, in rabbinic literature, right, they led to the victory, they led the Jews to victory, and that was the good part of the story. But remember, this was the tension between Hellenization and traditional Judaism. It goes against the backdrop of a rise in sectarianism between rabbinic Judaism and non-rabbinic Judaism, the Perushim and the Tzaddukim, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Right? You have a lot of sects going on at this time, right? You fast forward from the Hanukkah story, 50, 60, 70 years, that's when you start having the Essenes and the Qumran, and you have, the Jews had won a certain amount of independence or some autonomy, but at what cost? So then, you do end up with the Hasmoneans making a deal with the devil, making a deal with Rome, to let the Romans into power or control over Judea. And you also have those who Hasmoneans who were less traditional from a rabbinic point of view. So I think that the history is written by the victors, and certainly that strand that we're used to of traditional Judaism would look down at some of the later Hasmonean kings. But it's it doesn't take away from their initial zealotry and victory. Mila Shem Elai, right? Whoever is for the Lord, follow me. There's that element as well. And it's also hard because, as opposed to when there is no book or there's no authoritative book, it becomes harder to tell the story. There is what's called the Book of Maccabees. The Book of Maccabees is not a biblical book, right? It's not in the canon, but the Book of Maccabees, it does tell the story of Chanukah. It seems to be, ancient. It doesn't seem to be an eyewitness account, but it seems to be ancient, and it gives us some indication or some details. But remember, it's not authoritative. Even those of, when we talk about, is the Torah historically accurate or the like, that conversation takes place against the backdrop that we accept the Torah, right? We believe in the Torah. So whatever discrepancies or inconsistencies, well, we've already accepted it. It forms the basis of our religious attachment. We don't have that type of a document when it comes to Hanukkah. We have the fact that the rabbis are giving us a tradition of what's in the Talmud, but the details are scarce, as well as the fact that this is taking place in the period of history where we do have more definitive archaeological evidence. So it's one thing when, you have this, the story of, you have the scientific discoveries of creation, up against the biblical story of creation. But when you don't really have when you have, archaeological findings from the times of the Maccabees, and we don't really have our own tradition, it becomes a little bit more complicated. And, that's why very much, other than the basic story, which the Talmud tells, Shabbat 21b, 22a, 22b tells the story. At the times of Antiochus, the Maccabees came and they defeated a much larger army, and they set up days of Thanksgiving in Hallel, and then we have the lights. Right? We have a skeleton presentation. So a lot of the rest is left to conjecture and trying to unpack some spiritual messages. So that's the what, and so we start seeing that any light is a Hanukkah light. Now, it is interesting. I doubt there's anyone here who lights only one candle each night, right? Even though that's the mitzvah. I doubt that anyone here, if in a family of 4, only has 4 candles each night, even though that's like mahadrin, that's additional level. It's like eating glot kosher. And here, mahadrin, minat mahadrin, most of us, it seems like the entire Jewish people have accepted this enhanced, doubly enhanced performance of the mitzvah, which is, it's not something to be dismissed. The idea that the Jewish people and Jewish law has recognized the best way possible does seem to indicate a desire to illuminate as much as possible. It resonates in the rabbinic mindset, the idea of having as much light as possible. As well as, and this is later on a Shabbat 21b, the second, the last paragraph there, the sages taught it is a mitzvah to place the Hanukkah lamp at the entrance of one's house on the outside, so that all can see it. If you lived upstairs, he placed it at the window adjacent to the public domain. The idea is that the light is meant to be seen. And in a time of danger, when the Gentiles issued decrees to prohibit kindling lights, he places it on the table, and that is sufficient to fulfill his obligation. So we have, ideally, we have the lights on display. If that's difficult, at least you have it on display within the home as opposed to beyond the home. And this, relates a lot to, you could raise certain questions about lighting it by the window. Like if you live in a skyrise, high-rise apartment building, live on the 57th floor, who's going to see it if you put it at the window? Although consider the number of these sky-high apartment buildings in Manhattan, maybe you'll have someone neighbor across the street. But the idea of, but there does seem to be 2 things that emerge. There's the idea, the desirability of the light being on display as much as possible. And it's only an accommodation to dangerous times that we then move it inside. Leaving aside, nowadays, the idea of, do you light it at the window or do you light it, somewhere more central in the home? I still think many people lean to lighting at the window, even if you don't have many people who will pass by. There's the desire, the optimal placement is where people are going to see it. And we tend to consider it the optimal place at a window, even though, technically speaking, if there's no one going to be really passing by, or not usually passing by, you can light on the dining room table with the family. But the idea of, there seems to be within the lighting, the mitzvah of lighting of the candles, as much light as possible, the mahadrin min ha-mahadrin, right? The most meticulous ways possible, and involves more light, and that light being practically or even theoretically on display to as many people as possible. And so you have what seems to be a directive to have as much light on display as much as possible. The Rambam, in source number 3, Maimonides, when he describes the Hanukkah lighting mitzvah, the mitzvah of the Hanukkah candles is very, very precious, and a person must take great care to ensure the miracle is known and to increase praise and thanksgiving towards God for all the miracles he did for us. Even if a person does not have food to eat without utilizing charity, must borrow money for candles or sell his shirt and buy oil and candles to light. Right. So nowadays we don't really see ourselves as having to, go all out. Hanukkah candles, aren't necessarily the most expensive object. But here the Rambam, a few things are interesting about the Rambam. One, the fact that the Rambam seems to be philosophizing that the mitzvah is very, very precious. Right. Gets back to Al's point, which holiday is the most important? All right, they're all important. But here the Rambam is commenting that Hanukkah candles is very, very precious. Not only is it about ensuring the miracle is known and to encourage more people to praise God, but practically speaking, you got to sell the shirt off your back so that you can perform those mitzvahs. Right? Generally, in Jewish law, we have a principle that if you're unable to perform a mitzvah, you're exempt. Right? You can't do it. You can't do it. The Rambam is not satisfied with that usual level of commitment. You have to go above and beyond in order to have these Hanukkah lights. That Talmud actually talks about if you can only afford one set of lights, Shabbos candles or Hanukkah candles. So, there's a certain priority that exists. So it says that the Shabbos candles are more important because that's for creating the right environment on Shabbos for the family. But the Rambam is, again, he's taking already the Talmud's understanding, more light to more people is considered something very special. There's a certain soul to the Hanukkah candle. It's not only the practical lighting, as much light as possible for as many people as possible to see it. There's also, you're supposed to feel that these are very special. And we demonstrate that they're very special, that you have to sell the shirt off your back in order to buy them. Taking this idea of kind of the internal character of the Hanukkah lights, source number 4, Rav Sheshet asked, the verse in Leviticus says, outside the curtain of testimony, arrange the menorah for kindling. Right, so does God need the light of the menorah? Didn't the Jews travel in the desert for 40 years by God's light? Rather, the menorah is testimony for all mankind that divine presence dwells within Israel. The menorah in the Beis Hamikdash was a symbol of God. And the Ramban, Nachmanides, source number 5, understands that the symbolism of that menorah is transferred to the Hanukkah lights. Now, it's an obvious fact that when the sanctuary is not in existence and the offerings are not brought because of its destruction, the lighting of the lamps in the temple also ceases. So what does the Midrash mean in saying that God promised Aaron that lighting the lamps would never stop? Therefore, we must say that the sages of the Midrash were alluding to the lights of the dedication of the Hasmoneans, which applies on the festival of Hanukkah even after the destruction of the temple in our exile. In a sense, the lighting of the Hanukkah lights is an extension of the lighting of the temple lights. And the temple lights were not about illumination. The temple lights were about God's presence. There's a spiritual component to this as well. That if we carry forward, it's about more light means a greater connection, of trying to sense a greater illumination of God in our lives. Putting it on display is meant to be a demonstration of God's presence within the world. And so it's not only about a commemoration, it's also about our commitment, dedication, and faith in God's continued involvement in the universe. Which to me, it makes sense why we make the declaration in the Haneros Halalu prayer, right? Haneros Halalu Kodeshem. The candles are holy. I mean, candles are holy. Candles are light. No, they contain the spiritual essence of what the menorah in the temple represented, and that's God's presence. So, until now, we've seen some of the details of the regulations of the lighting and maybe what the internal essence or lessons of the menorah are about. And so, if we would stop here, we would see that the Hanukkah lights can represent something that is very special and holy in our own homes and should be shared outside the home. But we haven't yet addressed the question about what about these public lightings? Do they have a mitzvah component as well? Right? Should you make a bracha at a Hanukkah party or at an outdoor lighting? And I think conceptually, the idea of more light being shared outside is a wonderful extension of this, but is there a mitzvah component? So we may be able to draw some precedent from the fact that the custom that is discussed about lighting Chanukah lights, lighting the candles in shul. And many shuls have the practice that between Mincha and Mariv, they'll light the Chanukah lights. It's a nice idea, but no one there who's in shul generally needs to have the lights lit for them. People are going to go home and light it themselves. But this is a very old practice. Source number 7, the Sefer HaItur, right? That we're talking about in the West, Central Europe, France, Germany, book collection of the laws of Chanukah. There is a custom to light Chanukah candles in the synagogue. Some places light the candles in the doorway, and some places in the middle of the synagogue. Right, so we see there's a custom developing to have Chanukah lights in the synagogue. Why? So the Kolbo, source number 8, talks about this to fulfill the requirement of those who don't know how to light themselves, as well as those who don't make the effort to light themselves. This lighting also beautifies the mitzvah and publicizes the miracle. It also commemorates the lighting in the temple. Look, some people aren't going to light at home. It's kind of interesting because I guess sociologically and culturally then, you'd have people going to shul on a weekday who weren't really that observant and wouldn't light Hanukkah candles. It's kind of these days, more often, those who are going to minyan during the week are those who might be more committed to ritual observance. But there was a time that there were minyan people who, I'm coming to minyan, I'm not going to light Hanukkah lights at home. So having the Hanukkah lights lit in shul was for their benefit. But it's also commemorating the lighting in the temple. Okay, but not everyone had this custom. Source number 9. It appears to me that there is no obligation to light Hanukkah candles in a synagogue. They're only lit in a place someone lives, so that we can have the mitzvah on the right, mezuzah on the right, and the Hanukkah lights on the left. The synagogue is exempt from a mezuzah. So here, the Sefer HaManhig mentions another statement in the Talmud that when we light, you should keep the Hanukkah lights opposite the mezuzah. So you're surrounded by mitzvahs. You have mezuzah on the right and Hanukkah on the left. It's a wonderful mitzvah tunnel. But he also points out something which you may not have known, that a shul technically doesn't need a mezuzah. And that's because a shul is not a home. And the reason why our shuls today have that mezuzah is mainly because of the fact that you're going to walk into a shul and there's no mezuzah there, and everyone's going to be wondering, where's the mezuzah? So it's easier to put a mezuzah up so as to avoid people being confused and thinking maybe they don't need the mezuzah than not. But Rabbi Avram ben Natan says it's a shul. A shul does not need Hanukkah lights. The house needs Hanukkah lights. So we have the various practices. Rabbi Yosef Cairo, Hanukkah candles are lit in the synagogue for the guests who don't have a home in which to light, the same way we say Kiddush there for the guests, right? Really, Rabbi Yosef Cairo starts off by saying it's utilitarian. If someone's in shul and is not going to go home, let them have lighting in the shul. At the end of the day, though, the Shulchan Aruch codifies that we kindle and recite the benedictions in the synagogue for the sake of publicizing the miracle. We don't do it for guests, we do it to publicize the miracle. And he says a person does not fulfill his obligation with the lights in the synagogue, he needs to kindle again in his own house. We have the custom to kindle in the synagogue between the afternoon prayer and the evening prayer, between Mincha and Mariv. It's a little bit earlier than you light at home, but it seems that the practice is to light. But it's very strange, because why should you say a bracha on this light? It just said you don't fulfill your mitzvah. So what's going on? So Rabbi Elio Kramer, the Vilna Gaon, comments, a proof for lighting Hanukkah candles in the synagogue can be found from the Hallel recited in the synagogue on the first nights of Pesach to publicize the miracle. So if you're thinking that you've never done that practice before, it's because most people do not. Most people do not say Hallel in the shul on the first nights of Pesach. They say Hallel at the Seder. But the Vilna Gaon is commenting, we have a custom, it's not a mitzvah, but if it's a valid ritual practice, it needs a bracha. So, as Rabbi Yaakov Emden explains, if the Hanukkah candles would be lit in the synagogue without a blessing, people would not appreciate that they're lit to publicize the miracle. They would think they're ordinary candles for light. Right? If you light up a Hanukkah light, but you don't say bracha over Hanukkah, how do you know what it's about? It's almost, it's almost like the idea of putting up the mezuzah. People nowadays, people think, well, all buildings need a mezuzah, so put up the mezuzah so people don't get confused. Rabbi Yaakov Emden, right, he's in the 18th century, says, look, if we would just light up lights in the front of the shul on Chanukah without saying a blessing, there'd be a disconnect. You wouldn't know that it's about Chanukah. So that's why the standard practice is we light in the shul to publicize the miracle. And we light in the shul to publicize the miracle, and we say a blessing because this experience of lighting in public deserves a blessing. That's this rule in shul. So what if you want to light outside of shul? Hanukkah party, outdoor lighting. So Rabbi Yekutiel Halberstam, the Sanzer Rebbe, survivor of the Holocaust, very dedicated to his community, and he moved his community to Netanya in Israel and built Laniado Hospital. He says it is clear that the custom of lighting the Hanukkah candles is only in a synagogue or study hall and not other places. He says, look, there's enough of a challenge as to question why we light it in the shul altogether. We have that precedent. We're not going to extend that precedent. So Rabbi Binyamin Zilber, another contemporary rabbi, Israel, passed away about 15 years ago. He says, in a situation where Hanukkah candles are lit in the city square, many of those present do not attend the synagogue where the custom is to light Hanukkah candles. One can certainly make a blessing over this lighting since it's really outside where ideally the candle should be lit. He said, look, if you have a gathering of people outside on Hanukkah, most of those people were probably not in shul. In a sense, the idea of synagogue lighting gets transferred to the outdoor lighting. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, the famous Sephardic authority, points out that he thinks that if you have an outdoor lighting, you could say a bracha as long as you're going to daven Marav afterwards. You actually have to literally transform that experience into a shul davening experience, and then you can make a bracha. Otherwise, you don't. So, practically speaking, we see that there's this. We started off with the mitzvahs in the home and the mitzvahs to show the light, and we saw that there's also value in lighting outside of the home to publicize the miracle. And that lighting outside the home to publicize a miracle, which takes place in the shul, has validity, and has utility, and has inspiration. And therefore, the practice is often to light it that way, to light in the shul with a bracha. And if we carry over that thinking outside, we can make a valid case that, yes, anytime you're with people, you can turn that experience into a illuminating Hanukkah, publicizing the miracle experience, which may be worthy of a blessing. Some disagree. I think practically speaking, many people, if they're having a Hanukkah celebration, many people do make the bracha. Some feel that that's a little, like Rabbi Zilber says. But others take the Rabbi Halberstam approach and think if it's not shul, if it's not the davening, then not to do it. But I think that what's being addressed is how we can take the meaning and message of the light, which we've already increased by how we light them, which we've already put where others can see it so that it can be further disseminated. How we can take that message, which isn't only about the commemoration, but also about elevating this idea of holiness and sanctity, of God's existence and presence in the world. That is a message that doesn't need to be held back and should be on display as much as possible. So I hope everyone has an opportunity to light their own, see others, see more light, share the light as much as possible. Someone said that it was on Hanukkah, the Jews are taking their battle against the Greek way of life. And so one of the ways we commemorate that, because remember, for the Jew, the focus is the soul, the spirit. For the Greek, the focus is the body, to glorify the body. So on Hanukkah, the Jews commemorate that battle, and to highlight the supremacy of the soul over the glorification of the body. We eat enough latkes and donuts, so we ensure that our body will never equal the Greek ideal. So we want to, basically Chanukah is about the ensuring that, yes, we never aspire for that Greek beauty ideal. So enjoy the latkes and donuts as well, and happy to take questions or comments.